Good morning. This is retired Pastor Karl Schmidt from Calvary Lutheran Church in Amherst, New York. Church is presently closed because, COVID is running amok. Some days there's more than 4,000 dead a day, and some days there's over 200,000 new people getting sick. Not going real well. Vaccines are running short. Again, not going real well at all. People who got the first vaccine might not get the second because, they're just not there. Anyways, apart from all the fun and dying and sickness and all the rest, and did I mention that there's chaos in the Capitol and that there's guardsmen with rifles sleeping with their rifles on the floor of the Capitol buildings? Oh yeah, why is that? Well, a group of real idiots stormed the Capitol and murdered a federal officer who, a family, it just wanted to go home after work, but he's not, he's dead because of these idiots. It's a bad week. So that's kind of life in this 1-17-21, the second Sunday after the Epiphany. Well, apart from little things like that, the economy is in shambles. People are in food banks just trying to get food for their kids, medicine for their kids and themselves. And, did I mention it's not been a good week in America? I mean, the pandemic is everywhere in the world, hence the word pandemic. But at the same time, it's especially bad here. And go figure, huh? I guess it's too much for some people to wear a mask. Don't even know what to say about that. I mean, if you had surgery and your surgeon showed up with a cigar and spilling a glass of whiskey into the surgical wound and then coughing up cigar dust and garbage into your wound, you wouldn't want that. I mean, that surgeon would be fired and censured and lose his medical license. But there's geniuses out there who can't figure out that they need to wear a mask. Amazing. Adults who went to school, which us taxpayers paid for, and yet they're not smart enough to wear a mask. Welcome to the United States in this 17th day of January 21. Wonderful times. What a mess. Anyways, in the midst of that mess, it still happens to be the second Sunday after the Epiphany. Oh, the Epiphany, that was January 6th. Do I even need to go there? The infamous day when they morons and idiots stormed the Capitol building and murdered a police officer and trashed the place and did unspeakable things, just unspeakable days. And it hasn't been much fun since. Hence, guardsmen in every state's capital protecting that from violent idiots. And, I don't know, the Capitol ready for an inauguration in just maybe 3 days, the 20th. And we're all praying for the safety of our public servants. Why? Because there are seditious, treasonous idiots out there causing harm and chaos and mayhem. And this part of the pastor's job to preach the law. Here it is. I hope the authorities come down on you lawbreakers with the full force of state and federal and local law, and that you pay the full price for your criminality, because you're nothing but common thugs and criminals. Now, if that preaching of the law isn't plain enough for you, then you're too ignorant to even know what the law is. But hey, go back and read the 10 Commandments if you didn't get it. Respecting mother and father includes government and government authorities and government buildings, and especially being nice to police officers of any rank and style and type, rather than beating on them with a flagpole. What an obvious example of moronic, idiotic, criminal behavior. I cannot begin to apply the law, God's law, to you. But you will face the law. Anyways, let's move on. For the second Sunday of Epiphany, the text assigned for this is from the Gospel of John, the 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 11. In a terrible, terrible time of American history, and living through it has been an awful experience. Thank you very much, you idiots. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. The wretchedness of these people. All right, this is not don't pretend this is politics. There's no politics in this. This is criminality, criminal behavior, anarchists, traitors to our country, treasonous behavior, and sedition. And I hope the fullest extent of the law of sedition and treason and murder are hunted down and carried out upon your heads for what you have done to just everything. Well, that being said, let's move on with the sermon. The text, as you pointed, this second chapter is a very nice text. It shows the sense of humor of God, which we're going to use in this sermon, because here that God chose how to announce his son into the world rather than, in addition to the star, the wise man on the day of Epiphany, January 6th, which don't remind me of, a horrible day in American history forever. But at the same time, it's also was a day when God the Father revealed his son into the world, Jesus of Nazareth, born in Bethlehem, and so grew up in Nazareth. Well, this is where Jesus and his disciples go to a wedding. And now, in his adult public ministry is about to begin, which is going to last about 3 years, which will lead him to the cross to be the Savior of the world. All right. This is the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus saith unto him, They have no wine. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. His mother saith unto the servants, Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. And there were there set 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. Jesus saith unto them, Fill the water pots with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And then he said to them, Draw it out now, and bear it unto the governor of the feast. And they did bear it. When the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know from whence it was, but the servants which drew the water knew, the governor of the feast called the bridegroom, and saith unto him, Every man at the beginning does set forth the good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. This beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. Here ends that portion of the gospel text from the Gospel of John, the 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 11. Now, I said this has a lot to do with the sense of humor of God in a time, again, where the sense of humor is hard to find in our world. But it does. Of all the places and of all the occasions, the God the Father picked to have his son be revealed at a poor man's wedding in Cana, a nowhere little place in Galilee, which is, again, nowhere. This is this is not the cosmopolitan center of activity and human endeavor. This is nowhere. It's small town nowhere. And in that environment, God revealed to the world his son and his work. And this takes a lot of sense of humor to do it this way. He didn't send him to the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem or to the temple, but to this poor man's wedding. And it was so poor that they only had enough wine for a couple days. And a poor man's wedding was expected to go at least 5-6 days. It would cost them a year's salary. They'd have to save up every penny to pay for this thing. And they ran out in spite of that in just a couple days. Maybe they should have invited Jesus and his disciples, huh? There's 13 guys right there. Jesus and the 12 disciples. Not maybe the best idea if you're running short of supplies, but they did. They were generous. And, of course, Jesus and his pals drank, and, the wine disappeared. Gone. So what did Jesus do? Well, again, sense of humor. He played a prank, what we would call prank, on the bridegroom and the bride, who didn't know what he was about to do. His own mother had no idea what he's about to do, or much less anyone else. Even the servants that they were hired, obviously a poor man doesn't have servants, But they hired people, staff, if you call it that, the wedding staff, to go get the water in these big heavy stone pots. And stone pots were used by the Jews as kosher. This was because stone could be cleaned properly, whereas other types of materials and pots could not be as equally well cleaned. That's all details that are recorded in the Mishnah, the Jewish oral law, and there you can find more about that if you're interested in reading. Anyways, so God's sense of humor. He went to this tiny little nowhere place to a poor man's wedding, and that had his son do this something that you'd see on Penn and Teller in the Magic Hour. Ta-da! All of a sudden there's wine there. That's cute. It takes a sense of humor to do something like that. If you're real stoic and serious, let me assure you, that would not be how you would do this. But that just reveals that God does have a sense of humor, which is critical to everything. Because in a world filled with wretchedness and sin and all of the depravity that we have seen in the last week, just in the United States and just in our nation's capital, of the criminal garbage that came there to do damage and harm, beating on a police officer with a flagpole. How sick, disturbed, demented do you have to be to even think of doing such a thing? And yet, crowds of them. Crowds. What despicable behavior. But that's an example of humankind, isn't it? And people approved of them. And of the nonsense and the lies that have been spewed from the top on down of this country for years now. And our own government authorities have called them lies. The head of security services for the United States of America said that these are lies and this was the most secure election in the history of our country's elections. Not that these people want to repeat the truth, which comes from our own security services, but they pander to lies. And then they show up to do violence. It's just despicable and disgusting. These people, if you want to still be citizens, turn yourselves in. How about that? Do us all a favor. Because you've done a disservice to our nation as traitors and seditionists and just wretched trash. It's disgusting, and the children see this. Have you no conscience at all? I would suppose not. But anyways, so much for the law, and that is the proper preaching of the law, especially when the national conscience is so impinged with garbage and lies that on a national scale people could think of this and approve of this and cheer on those who do such things. That needs the law. Not just civil law, but to hear God's law. God does not approve of such things. He says, render unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar. He says, respect the kings, respect these people, even if they're wretched and horrible. They'll pass. But it's to each other's safety and well-being that we as citizens are dedicated. Anyways, now the gospel. That God looks at this clown mess. And just like they're at this poor man's wedding, I mean, they were about to have to tell everyone that, hey, they're out of wine, party's over. We had a couple of good days, now we're done. And Jesus' mother is so concerned, she went to Jesus and said, could you do something? Jesus is like, okay, yeah, well, yeah, it just happens that this is, yeah, I'm about to, but I'll take care of it. And so then he does what he does. That you heard me read the text from the Gospel of John, the 2nd chapter. And that's God's sense of humor, that he, in a humorous way, does something kind and nice. And that's what the gospel is. That in a wretched world that hates him and his son, like in the beginning, the previous chapter, this goes into that very fact that the light came into the world and men loved darkness rather than the light, which is a metaphoric way of saying people don't like God at all. They have no use for him and would like to just see him go away. And in spite of that, God comes closer to us, sends his son, and does a kindness. Decides to forgive wretched trash. And I'm not just talking about those who did such wretched, filthy things in Washington, but I'm talking about all of us. For there's none that is righteous, no, not one. We've all gone astray as sheep. And those are 2 quotes from Scripture, and there's hundreds and thousands more. But why bother? One should be enough. Simply put, one should be enough. And in that environment of human wretchedness and disgusting behaviors, God the Father says, you know what? I'm not going to throw them away. I'm not going to toss them in a trash heap of a pile of hell. Instead, I'm going to forgive them. I'm going to send my son to them to take the punishment that they have coming. And then, because my son lives a perfect life of love, to accept that as though they lived a perfect life of love. That's what the big fancy word righteousness means. Dikaiosune in Greek, and in Hebrew it's tzaddik. In English it's righteousness, or to be right with God. And Jesus does that for us because none of us can. And then Jesus goes to the cross and takes the original penalty, mut, death in Hebrew, thanatos in Greek. He takes death upon himself and rises from the dead, because death can't hold the Son of God, who as Savior of the world then stands before his Father and says, I have died for these, I have lived for these, accept what I've done in their stead. And the Father says, yeah, that was my whole idea. That's it. Yep. And sure, I accept it. It's all good. It's all good. So that's humorous. I mean, why would God do this? I cannot imagine, just as I cannot imagine the wretched human depravity we've seen and witnessed this week. The whole world witnessed it. Just wretched depravity. And yet, God the Father, they'll still face human justice. Be sure of that. But at the same time, there is forgiveness with God. Now, they'll still have to face the penalty of their actions, whatever that is. In heaven's sake, it should be severe, as full extent of the law in its penalty phase, and in the trials that should commence to determine their guilt. And since we all watched it on camera, it would be hard to say innocent, but they're innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. But once proven guilty, then the full weight of the penalty should rest upon their shoulders. But that is not to say that God does not forgive the condemned. The thief on the cross was sentenced to death by the Romans, and yet God offered him forgiveness of sins. He still was put to death on the cross, but in the afterlife he lived a new day with God. This is the idea of the gospel. It's God the Father's sense of humor, to look at a wretched world and instead to call them sons and daughters. Blessed, forgiven, his dear children. Again, that requires an immense sense of humor, because I cannot imagine how he does that or why he would even want to. But he does. And that's the gospel message. So, I hope and pray for our civil servants, men and women who could make plenty more money in the private sector, but are not in it for the money, but to serve you, each of us, to serve us. And they dedicate their lives to this endeavor, and they work tirelessly to do it. And it is sickening to hear members of Congress saying they're afraid to go to work because they not only fear from threats from the outside, but from each other. That's a horrible thing. I toured that place as a child. 60, whatever, 59 years ago, 58 years ago. And I looked at it all back then as a child, through child's eyes, and I thought, well, wondrous. And now I look at it through adult, jaded eyes as a retired pastor, and I think to myself, how awful. How awful that dedicated men and women go to work fearing for their safety in a country as such as the United States, where that is not supposed to happen. And that it happened, incited, driven, egged on by people at the top, people that we should be able to have respect for and instead despise for being such wretched garbage and leading country down a horrible, messy path to what we have in front of us now. We can hope and pray that the new leaders that the American people have elected will step forward, stop lying, telling truth instead, and serve us as their calling is. For that calling is also a divine calling. The government is also a gift from God to serve people so that those who do right and well have nothing to fear, but that the government will serve them. So we hope and pray that things get back on track. Instead of government officials who think that we're there to serve them, that they'll realize that they got the job to serve us. So, take care. This has been retired Pastor Karl Schmidt from Calvary Lutheran, serving emeritus, and hope that things go well for the inauguration and that there's safety and no one gets hurt, and that anyone with wicked intentions, evil intentions, an evil heart and disturbed conscience will straighten out and stop their wretched filth and trash, and instead do better. So, and that we wish health and safety and wellness, especially a time of plague, for all our public servants at every level of government, wherever they are, because these are men and women who serve us tirelessly and then receive such hatred. It's a shame that such should even be said in this United States, but that's what we have at our feet. So treat your public servants well. Compliment them. Thank them for their service. And if you're one of these wretched pieces of trash that imagines harm, I hope the government tracks you down, stops you, arrests you, prosecutes you properly in a trial, and then sentences you to whatever the government can. So, behave. That's it. Bye-bye.